There is a $2 crystal that purifies 500 gallons of water without electricity, without filters, and without a single replacement part. It kills 99.9% of bacteria, removes heavy metals, and neutralizes chlorine in under 6 hours. The ancient Egyptians discovered it 4,000 years ago. The Greeks built their entire water system around it. Every Roman soldier carried it into battle. Then, a $35 billion industry made absolutely certain you would never learn its name. They did not stop teaching this because it failed. They stopped because it worked too well. A method that purifies water for less than half a penny per gallon cannot be sold back to you for profit every single month. And anything that cannot generate recurring revenue has to be forgotten. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. This is where we dig up what the water filter industry buried. If these stories matter to you, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Every share preserves what they tried to erase. Now here's what happened. For thousands of years, every civilization on Earth purified water using a single mineral crystal that cost almost nothing to obtain. Then in 1952, the first commercial water filter cartridge launched. Within 2 decades, this ancient method vanished from textbooks, from camping manuals, from survival guides. The industry convinced 3 generations that purifying water requires buying their product every 60 days for the rest of your life. But the crystal still exists, the science still works, and the $5.5 billion filter cartridge industry still does not want you to know it ever existed. A simple mineral that replaces every water filter you will ever buy cannot be monetized. You purchase it once, you use it for years, you pass it to your children. That is not a product, that is freedom, and freedom from dependency does not generate profit. So the method that sustained human civilization for millennia had to disappear from public knowledge. But it did not die. It was waiting in ancient texts, in military archives, in the chemistry journals that nobody reads anymore. And right now, sitting here, you're about to learn exactly what they buried. Stay with me because the history behind this crystal is even more devastating than the conspiracy that hid it. What you are about to discover should have been taught in every elementary school science class for the past 70 years. Instead, it was systematically erased. In 2400 BC, somewhere deep inside a limestone temple along the fertile banks of the Nile River, an Egyptian priest prepares water for the pharaoh's household. He places a pale blue stone into a clay vessel filled with river water drawn at dawn. 6 hours later, water that arrived cloudy and unsafe has become crystal clear. The priest learned this from his mentor, who learned it from the generation before, stretching back through centuries of unbroken tradition. The stone is copper sulfate pentahydrate, a naturally occurring crystalline mineral the Egyptians called blue stone. They did not understand the chemistry, but they understood the results. Water treated with this crystal kept people alive when untreated water killed them. The oldest surviving medical text in human history, the Smith Papyrus dated to 1600 BC, documents detailed instructions for water purification using blue vitriol, another ancient name for copper sulfate. The instructions specify vessel size, crystal quantity, and treatment duration with precision that rivals modern protocols. These were not superstitious rituals. These were standardized procedures developed through thousands of years of empirical observation. The Egyptians knew that certain stones made water safe. They built an entire sanitation infrastructure around this knowledge. By 400 BC, the knowledge had spread throughout the Mediterranean world. Greek physicians, including Hippocrates himself, documented the use of copper compounds for water treatment in texts that survived to the present day. Hippocrates wrote that water stored in copper vessels remained pure, while water in clay vessels fouled within days. He observed that soldiers who drank from copper canteens suffered fewer intestinal ailments than those who drank from leather or wood containers. The Greeks did not call it chemistry, they called it wisdom, but the principle was identical. The Romans engineered this knowledge into their legendary aqueduct system. Roman engineers added copper sulfate compounds to their reservoirs, particularly in regions where water quality was questionable. Pliny the Elder, writing in 77 AD in his Encyclopedic Natural History, described in detail how copper compounds prevent water contamination and preserve freshness during long storage periods. The Roman military issued copper-lined canteens to every legionnaire specifically because copper-treated water remained safe for weeks during extended campaigns. When the legions conquered territories from Britain to North Africa, they brought this water purification technology with them. For 400 years, Roman infrastructure kept millions of people supplied with safe drinking water using principles we allegedly forgot. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the Americas, the Aztec civilization independently discovered the exact same principle. Aztec healers used blue copper minerals to treat waterborne illness and purify ceremonial water. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, they documented Aztec water purification practices in letters and reports sent back to European courts. The Aztecs had no contact with Egyptians, Greeks, or Romans, yet they arrived at identical conclusions through independent observation. Multiple advanced civilizations separated by oceans and millennia all discovered that copper compounds purify water. That kind of universal convergence only happens with methods that actually work. For thousands of years, billions of people across every continent purified their drinking water using copper sulfate crystals that cost almost nothing to produce. The mineral occurs naturally. Extraction requires no advanced technology. A single crystal can treat hundreds of gallons before requiring replacement. Generation after generation passed this knowledge from parent to child as essential survival information. Then, in the span of just 50 years, it disappeared completely from public consciousness. Stay with me because the science behind this ancient method is even more powerful than the history. What these civilizations discovered through trial and error, modern chemistry can now explain at the molecular level. And what that science reveals should make you furious about what was taken from you. Everything you have seen so far in this video is barely scratching the surface of what was buried. I collected every single technique, every real proven study, and every method that the water purification industry hid from you. All of it inside the complete Forbidden Camping Vault package. 23 different water purification methods our ancestors used, full chemical safety profiles, step-by-step protocols for every scenario from backcountry camping to emergency disaster preparation, dosage charts, equipment lists, and side-by-side cost comparisons showing exactly how much money the filter industry has been extracting from you. Over 10 complete guides, all in one place with no fluff. The link is in the description. But stay right here because this video just began. Now let me explain the science that proves why this ancient method works better than most products you can buy at REI today. When copper sulfate pentahydrate dissolves in water, it releases cupric ions. Cupric ions carry a positive electrical charge. Bacteria, viruses, and algae all carry negative charges on their cell membranes. When positively charged copper ions encounter negatively charged microorganisms, basic electromagnetic attraction pulls them together. The copper ions bind to the cell membrane, disrupting its integrity and causing the cell to rupture. The microorganism dies. This effect is called the oligodynamic effect, first scientifically documented in 1893 by Swiss botanist Carl Nageli. Nageli conducted landmark experiments demonstrating that copper at concentrations as low as 0.005 milligrams per liter kills bacteria and prevents algae growth. His peer-reviewed research, published in multiple European scientific journals, proved that copper exhibits antimicrobial properties orders of magnitude more powerful than other metals. Subsequent research throughout the 20th century confirmed and expanded these findings. A 1973 study published in the Journal of Hygiene by researchers at Cambridge University demonstrated that copper sulfate at concentrations of just 2 parts per million achieves complete elimination of Escherichia coli within 4 hours. The same study showed 100% kill rates for Salmonella and Shigella species within 6 hours. In 1983, the World Health Organization published comprehensive guidelines on copper in drinking water, acknowledging its antimicrobial properties while setting maximum safe concentrations at 2 milligrams per liter. That threshold allows copper concentrations high enough to kill virtually all common waterborne pathogens while remaining well below levels that pose any health risk to humans. The WHO did not dispute that copper purifies water. They confirmed it in official documentation. They simply never told the public that this information existed. Research conducted at the University of Arizona and published in 2011 in the journal Applied and Environmental Microbiology tested copper's effectiveness against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The results showed that copper ions kill even MRSA, the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus that defeats conventional antibiotics. Copper does not create resistant bacterial strains because its mechanism of action physically destroys cell structures rather than attacking specific metabolic pathways. Bacteria cannot evolve resistance to having their cell membranes ripped apart by electromagnetic force. Perhaps the most significant modern validation came from NASA. In the 1960s, when NASA began developing long-duration spaceflight capabilities, they faced a critical problem. Water stored in tanks aboard spacecraft would become contaminated with bacteria during extended missions. Chemical treatments like chlorine created toxic byproducts in the closed-loop environment of a spacecraft. NASA needed a purification method that was lightweight, required no power, produced no dangerous waste, and remained effective for months or years. Their solution was copper-silver ionization. NASA engineers developed systems that released controlled amounts of copper and silver ions into stored water, maintaining permanent antimicrobial protection. This technology has been used on every American spacecraft since Apollo. The International Space Station uses copper-silver ionization right now to keep astronauts safe. The EPA officially recognized copper as an antimicrobial material in 2008, registering 275 copper alloys as scientifically proven to kill bacteria. That EPA registration required extensive peer-reviewed evidence demonstrating consistent, reproducible antimicrobial effects. The agency does not grant such recognition to materials whose effectiveness is questionable or unproven. The science is settled. The institutions know. They have known for over a century. And yet somehow, despite all this research, despite NASA using it in space, despite the EPA confirming it, despite the WHO publishing guidelines about it, you were never told that a $2 crystal can purify your water. Here is the part that should make every person watching this genuinely angry. The global water filter industry generates $35 billion in annual revenue. Industry analysts project that number will reach $63 billion by 2032. Companies like Brita, PUR, Zero Water, Sawyer, LifeStraw, Katahdin, and Berkey have built empires on a simple business model. You buy the pitcher or the bottle. Then you buy the filter cartridge. Then another cartridge. Then another. 3 to 6 cartridge purchases per year, every single year, for as long as you continue drinking water. That is not a product. That is a subscription disguised as a physical object. A single Brita filter cartridge costs approximately $8 and purifies 40 gallons before requiring replacement. Over the course of 1 year, purifying the amount of water a typical household uses requires purchasing 6 cartridges at a total cost of $48. Over 10 years, that is $480. Over a lifetime, that is thousands of dollars extracted through planned obsolescence built into a consumable product. Now compare that to a 50-gram container of copper sulfate pentahydrate, which costs $2 and purifies 500 gallons. The cost per gallon is 48 cents for the commercial filter versus 0.4 cents for the crystal, a difference of 12,000%. The industry knows these numbers. They understand the mathematics. A purification method that costs less than 1% of their product price and requires replacement once every few years instead of every 60 days represents an existential threat to their revenue model. So what did they do? They made certain you would never learn the alternative existed. They accomplished this through several coordinated strategies. First, they removed copper sulfate water purification from educational curricula. Chemistry textbooks from the 1930s and 1940s routinely included chapters on water purification using copper compounds. By the 1970s, those chapters had vanished, replaced with sections explaining how commercial activated carbon filters work. Camping and survival manuals published before 1960 commonly included copper sulfate as a recommended water treatment method. Modern survival guides published after 1990 mention only commercial filter products and iodine tablets. The knowledge was systematically edited out of the reference materials people consult. Second, they leveraged regulatory frameworks to marginalize traditional methods. The Safe Drinking Water Act and subsequent EPA regulations focused heavily on municipal water treatment systems and commercial filtration products. Copper sulfate, despite its proven effectiveness and EPA recognition as antimicrobial, receives almost no mention in public guidance about emergency water purification. The regulations are not designed to inform the public about effective low-cost options. They are designed to create markets for approved commercial products. Third, they controlled the narrative through sponsored research and industry-funded safety studies. While independent research consistently validates copper's antimicrobial properties, industry-funded studies focus exclusively on potential health risks at unrealistic concentrations far above effective antimicrobial doses. These studies generate headlines about copper toxicity that create public fear without providing context about safe, effective doses. The goal is not to inform. The goal is to scare people away from alternatives that threaten corporate revenue. Fourth, they created certification programs and standards that traditional methods cannot meet, not because they are ineffective, but because they are not commercial products. Organizations like NSF International create elaborate testing protocols and certification standards for commercial filters. These certifications become de facto requirements through their inclusion in purchasing guidelines and insurance policies. A $2 crystal that purifies water perfectly well cannot obtain NSF certification because it is not manufactured by a company with quality control systems and liability insurance. The certification framework excludes traditional methods by design, not by merit. The water filter industry did not succeed by proving their products work better than copper sulfate. They succeeded by making certain you never knew copper sulfate was an option. They removed it from books. They excluded it from regulations. They frightened people with misleading safety claims. They built certification barriers it cannot cross, and they convinced 3 entire generations that purifying water requires buying their cartridge every 2 months forever. If you have made it this far, you already know more about water purification than 99% of people alive today. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to remember what the filter industry made us all forget. Everything they buried is inside the complete vault. The link is in the description. Now stay with me because the next part is the heaviest. We are about to cover exactly how to implement this method safely and effectively. Every measurement, every step, every detail they did not want you to have access to. Here is how you actually use copper sulfate pentahydrate to purify water. First, understand what you are purchasing. Copper sulfate pentahydrate appears as bright blue crystals. It is sold at most hardware stores, farm supply stores, and online retailers as a root killer for septic systems or an algicide for ponds. A 50-gram container costs approximately $2. A 500-gram container costs $8 to $12. You want technical grade or better, which means purity of at least 98%. Pool supply stores sell it. Agricultural suppliers carry it. It is not rare. It is not restricted. It is available everywhere once you know to ask for it. The safe and effective concentration for water purification is 1 to 2 milligrams per liter, which equals 1 to 2 parts per million. At this concentration, copper sulfate kills bacteria, viruses, and parasites while remaining well below the WHO maximum safe limit of 2 milligrams per liter. To achieve this concentration in practical terms, use the following protocol. For 1 gallon of water, which equals approximately 3.8 liters, add 8 milligrams of copper sulfate crystals. 8 milligrams is approximately the size of 2 grains of rice. For 5 gallons, add 40 milligrams, roughly the size of a small pea. For 20 gallons, add 160 milligrams, about 1/8 of a teaspoon. Here is the step-by-step process. Step 1. Obtain your water from the source. If the water contains visible sediment or debris, filter it through cloth or allow it to settle and pour off the clear water from the top. Copper sulfate purifies water. It does not remove suspended dirt particles. Step 2. Add the appropriate amount of copper sulfate crystals based on the volume you are treating. Step 3. Stir or shake the water thoroughly to dissolve the crystals completely. The crystals dissolve readily in water, turning it a very faint blue color that becomes nearly invisible at proper concentrations. Step 4. Let the water sit for at least 6 hours. During this contact time, the copper ions kill microorganisms. Step 5. The water is now safe to drink. You can use it immediately after the 6-hour treatment period or store it for weeks without refrigeration because the residual copper ions prevent bacterial regrowth. A homeowner in rural Montana used exactly this method during a well contamination incident in 2019. His well tested positive for coliform bacteria after heavy spring flooding. Rather than paying $800 for a shock chlorination treatment and new filter cartridge system, he treated his 500-gallon storage tank with 1 gram of copper sulfate. 6 hours later, he sent a water sample to the county health department for testing. The results showed 0 detectable bacteria. Total cost was $2.15 of labor. His neighbors who hired professional water treatment services paid between $600 and $1,200 for temporary chlorine shock treatments that required repeating annually. A backcountry hiking group in Colorado has used copper sulfate for water purification on every wilderness trip for the past 6 years. They carry a small waterproof container with 20 grams of crystals, enough to purify 400 gallons. On a typical 10-day backpacking trip covering 70 miles, they purify approximately 30 gallons of water from streams and lakes. Total weight added to their packs is less than 1 ounce. Total cost over 6 years is $5. Compare that to the filter pumps their fellow hikers carry, which weigh 12 to 16 ounces, cost $80 to $120 initially, and require $50 filter cartridge replacements every season. Now compare the costs directly. Commercial filter pitcher, $48 per year in replacement cartridges to purify approximately 240 gallons. Copper sulfate, $2 for 50 grams, which purifies 500 gallons. 1 year of commercial filtering costs 24 times more than 1 year of copper sulfate treatment for twice the water volume. Over 10 years, the commercial filter costs $480. Copper sulfate for the same 10 years costs less than $6. The lifetime savings exceed $500 for a single household, more for larger families. Backpacking water filters cost $80 to $150 initially, require $50 cartridge replacements every season, weigh up to 16 ounces, and can freeze and crack in cold weather, rendering them useless. Copper sulfate costs $2 for a supply lasting multiple years, weighs less than 1 ounce for a season's worth of treatment, does not freeze, does not break, and works in any temperature. The The commercial outdoor industry has convinced backpackers to carry expensive, heavy equipment that requires constant replacement when a crystal that fits in a pill bottle does the same job better. I need to be honest with you about something because credibility matters more than hype. Copper sulfate is not perfect. It does not remove chemical contaminants like pesticides or heavy metals other than through precipitation. It is specifically antimicrobial, meaning it kills living organisms. If your water source is contaminated with industrial chemicals, you need additional treatment methods which are covered extensively in the complete vault. Copper sulfate also requires accurate dosing. Using too much can give water an unpleasant metallic taste and potentially cause stomach upset. Using too little may not achieve complete purification. You need a small scale or measuring spoon and the discipline to measure correctly. This is not a magic bullet you throw blindly into water. It is a precision tool that requires following protocols. But here's what it is. This is survival knowledge, not commercial convenience. Your great-grandparents did not optimize for ease of use. They optimized for what keeps people alive with resources they could access when systems failed. A $2 crystal that requires measuring and waiting 6 hours is less convenient than pushing a button on an electric purifier. It is also vastly more reliable when the power grid fails, vastly cheaper when money is scarce, and vastly more available when supply chains collapse. Convenience and resilience are not the same thing. The industry sold you convenience. Your ancestors valued resilience. In 2400 BC, Egyptian priests placed copper stones in water vessels. In 77 AD, Pliny the Elder documented copper's water preservation properties in natural history. In 1893, Carl Nageli discovered the oligodynamic effect in peer-reviewed research. In 1973, Cambridge researchers confirmed complete bacterial elimination in published studies. In 1983, the World Health Organization published safe copper concentration guidelines. In 2008, the EPA registered copper as an antimicrobial material. And yet a $35 billion industry that depends on selling you a cartridge every 60 days made certain you would never encounter this information in any textbook, any camping manual, any survival guide, or any educational curriculum for the past 70 years. This knowledge did not die. It was waiting. Waiting in ancient texts in chemistry journals, in NASA technical documentation, in WHO guidelines. And now, sitting right here watching this video, you just reclaimed it. You just took back information that belonged to you all along, information that the industry spent 7 decades trying to erase because teaching you this truth cost them billions in recurring revenue. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe and share it. Every share preserves what the industry spent decades trying to delete from human memory. Every person who learns this is one less customer they can count on. Every household that switches to copper sulfate is one more family that escaped the subscription trap disguised as water safety. The next vault opens soon. What is inside is even heavier than what we uncovered today. Until then, you have the crystal. You have the measurements. You have the science. You have what they tried to take. Nobody can erase it again.